My life felt unreal, like something borrowed from a dream I never wanted to wake from. I was hours away from marrying the man I believed was my destiny, the person I thought had been written into my future long before I even understood what love was. Julian was everything I thought I needed. Calm, charming, safe. The man I imagined building a life with, raising children with, growing old beside. Every detail of the wedding had been planned with care. The flowers were chosen months in advance, the music rehearsed endlessly, the seating arranged down to the smallest detail. I stood in front of the mirror in my wedding dress, my mother's eyes filled with tears as she adjusted my veil. She looked at me with pride, with hope, with certainty. And in that moment, I believed with my whole heart that happiness had finally found me. What I didn't know was that I was standing on the edge of the greatest collapse of my life. There was one person I couldn't imagine this day without, my best friend, Laura. She wasn't just a friend, she was my other half, the person who knew my secrets, my fears, my past. We had grown up side by side, shared every milestone, every heartbreak. Choosing her as my maid of honor felt as natural as breathing. No one questioned it. Everyone knew how close we were. That morning, she helped me into my dress, adjusting the fabric with gentle hands and a soft smile that felt reassuring. She told me I looked beautiful. She held my hands and promised everything would be perfect. I believed her. I had no idea that behind her warm eyes, something dark was quietly waiting to destroy everything I trusted. We'd chosen an old countryside estate for the wedding, a place wrapped in history and elegance. Tall trees surrounded the property, and the gardens were alive with flowers and sunlight. The stone manor stood proudly at the center, warm and timeless, as if it had witnessed 1,000 love stories before ours. Our families and closest friends had arrived the day before, filling the house with laughter, wine, and celebration. That evening, we gathered outside under strings of glowing lights, eating, talking, and toasting to the future. Julian seemed calm, affectionate even. Laura never left my side. Everything looked perfect, too perfect. That night, as I lay in bed, my heart raced with excitement. I imagined walking down the aisle, seeing Julian waiting for me, the look on his face when our eyes met. I replayed the moment again and again until sleep finally found me. Morning came with soft sunlight spilling into the room. I woke up smiling, my body buzzing with anticipation. Laura was the first person to come in, carrying breakfast and wearing that same familiar smile. She laughed, teased me about being nervous, helped me get ready. I felt safe, loved, complete. I had no idea that every sense of safety I felt was built on a lie. When the ceremony began, my father took my arm and guided me toward the garden. Guests rose from their seats. Music floated through the air. I saw Julian waiting at the end of the aisle, dressed perfectly, his eyes locked on mine. My heart swelled as I walked toward him, convinced I was stepping into the life I had always dreamed of. The vows passed in a blur of emotion. When it was my turn, my voice shook, not from doubt, but from love. When he spoke his vows, his smile flickered for just a second. I noticed it, but brushed it aside. Everyone gets nervous, I told myself. We kissed. Applause erupted. In that moment, I truly believed I was the luckiest woman alive. The celebration that followed was beautiful. Laughter, music, candlelight. People toasted to our future. My father spoke proudly. Friends cried happy tears. Everything looked perfect from the outside. But somewhere deep inside, something felt off. Julian smiled, but it never quite reached his eyes. He laughed, but there was distance in him. I ignored it, convincing myself it was nothing more than exhaustion. I wanted the night to be perfect. I needed it to be. When the party ended, we went up to the bridal suite together. The room was softly lit, romantic, prepared for a moment I had imagined my entire life. My heart pounded with anticipation as I closed the door behind us. But instead of pulling me close, Julian sighed and sat down heavily. He loosened his tie, took off his jacket, and avoided my gaze. "I'm tired," he said flatly. I laughed softly at first, thinking he was joking, but his face didn't change. He turned away, undressed in silence, and lay down on the far side of the room. No kiss, no touch, no explanation. I stood there frozen, confusion crawling through my chest. I waited for him to say something, anything, but the room remained silent except for his breathing. That was the moment a quiet crack formed inside me. I lay down alone, staring at the ceiling, wondering how a day that began with so much hope could end in such emptiness. My wedding night passed in silence, and somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered that something was terribly wrong. I didn't know yet that the worst was still waiting for me. Sleep never really came to me that night. My eyes stayed fixed on the ceiling, while the quiet hum of the room pressed against my ears. Julian lay on the opposite side, his back turned to me, breathing slow and steady, as if nothing in the world weighed on him. I watched the outline of his body in the dim light, waiting for him to turn, to reach for me, to say something, anything, but he didn't move. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. My chest felt tight, as if the air itself had grown heavier. I tried to convince myself that exhaustion had overtaken him, that tomorrow everything would make sense again. But deep down, a quiet unease began to grow, settling into my bones. Eventually, I drifted into a shallow sleep. I don't know how much time passed before a sound pulled me awake, soft, muffled, almost unrecognizable. At first, I thought I had imagined it. Then it came again, a low murmur, a breathy sound. Not from beside me. I slowly turned my head. Julian's side of the bed was empty. My heart skipped painfully. I sat up, listening. The silence of the room felt heavy, broken only by faint sounds coming from somewhere down the hallway. A chill crawled over my skin as I slipped out of bed, my bare feet touching the cold floor. I told myself not to panic. Maybe he'd gone to the bathroom. Maybe he couldn't sleep. But deep down, something inside me was already screaming that this wasn't normal. I opened the door slowly, trying not to make a sound. The hallway was dim, lit only by a faint glow coming from one of the guest rooms. The house felt eerily still, as if it were holding its breath. And then I heard it again, a quiet moan. My heart slammed against my ribs. I took a step forward, then another, my body moving before my mind could stop me. With every step, dread wrapped tighter around my chest. The door at the end of the hall was slightly open. That room belonged to Julian's mother. She wasn't supposed to be there. My hands began to shake as I approached, every instinct screaming at me to turn around, to go back, to pretend I had heard nothing, but something stronger pulled me forward, a need to know, no matter how much it hurt. I stood inches from the door. Inside, I heard whispering, soft, breathy, indistinctly intimate. And then I heard her voice, Laura's. My stomach dropped. The world tilted. I pressed my hand against the wall to keep myself standing. There was no mistaking it. Her laugh, her tone, the familiar way she spoke when she thought no one was listening. A sound escaped my throat, small and broken. I leaned closer, my heart pounding loud, I sure they could hear it. And then I heard him, Julian's voice, low, intimate, saying her name. Everything inside me shattered in that instant. I don't remember how long I stood there frozen in disbelief. My mind refused to accept what my ears were hearing, but my body knew the truth. My body knew the truth before my heart was ready to face it. I felt dizzy, like the floor had vanished beneath my feet. Every memory of the past, every laugh, every promise, every I love you collapsed in on itself, meaningless and hollow. I wanted to scream. I wanted to collapse. I wanted to beg for this to not be real. But instead, I stood there, silent and shaking, as my world fell apart behind that closed door. Finally, the door opened. Julian stepped out first, his shirt half-buttoned, his hair messy. When he saw me standing there, his face drained of color. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Behind her, Laura appeared. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup smudged. The moment she saw me, she froze, eyes wide with horror. For a solid second, none of us moved. I stared at them, unable to speak. The betrayal was so heavy, it pressed against my chest until breathing hurt. Neither of them said a word. I broke the silence. "Why?" My voice came out hoarse, barely recognizable. Julian tried to look away. Laura's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't step forward. She didn't apologize. She didn't even try to explain. I felt something inside me crack, not loudly, but completely. I wanted to scream. I wanted to collapse. I wanted to beg for this to not be real. But instead, I stood there, silent and shaking, as my world fell apart behind that closed door. Finally, the door opened. Julian stepped out first, his shirt half-buttoned, his hair messy. I told them both that I had heard everything, that there was nothing left to explain. Julian tried to speak, muddling excuses that made no sense. Laura cried, whispering my name as if that alone could fix what she'd done. But I was already gone. I turned away without another word and walked back to my room. I packed my things with trembling hands, my movements slow and mechanical. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply emptied my life into a suitcase. When I walked out of the house, the sky was beginning to lighten with dawn. The air was cold against my skin, but I welcomed it. It made me feel real. I didn't look back. As I stepped onto the path leading away from the estate, one thought echoed through my mind with terrifying clarity. The life I had believed in was over, and whatever came next, I would face it alone. The sky was just beginning to lighten when I reached the edge of the estate. Pale blue streaks cut through the darkness, as if the world itself was trying to pretend nothing terrible had happened. My dress was wrinkled, my feet sore and dirty, my head throbbing from everything I hadn't allowed myself to feel yet. I stopped walking only when my legs could no longer carry me. I sat on a low stone wall near the road, hugging myself as the cold settled deep into my bones. I didn't cry. I couldn't. My body felt hollow, like something essential had been ripped out and left behind in that house. I stayed there for a long time, watching the sky change colors. I didn't know what I was going to do next. I only knew I couldn't go back. Eventually, exhaustion won. I don't remember falling asleep, only waking to the sound of birds and the ache in every part of my body. My phone buzzed repeatedly in my hand. Missed calls, messages. I didn't open them. I already knew who they were from. I stood up slowly and began walking back toward the estate, not because I wanted to, but because I had no other choice. My things were still there. My parents were there, and I knew that if I didn't face what had happened, it would swallow me whole. When I returned, the house looked peaceful, almost mockingly so. Sunlight poured through the windows, birds sang. Everything felt normal, as if nothing had shattered overnight. Inside, people were already awake. The smell of coffee drifted through the hall. Laughter echoed from the dining room. I stepped inside, and the sound stopped. Every head turned toward me. My mother was the first to notice the state I was in. Her face drained of color as she rushed toward me. She wrapped her arms around me, whispering my name over and over again. I didn't cry. I just stood there, empty, letting her hold me. "What happened?" she asked softly. I took a breath so deep it hurt. "I need everyone to listen," I said quietly. They gathered in the living room, my parents, his parents, a few close relatives who had stayed the night. They sat, confused, uneasy. Julian was nowhere to be seen. I stood in front of them, my hands shaking slightly, and told the truth. I told them what I had heard, what I had seen, who had betrayed me. The words came out steady, even though my chest burned with every sentence. Gasps filled the room. Someone covered their mouth. Someone else whispered, "No," under their breath. When I finished, silence fell like a heavy curtain. My mother's eyes filled with tears. My father's jaw tightened, his face turning pale with restrained fury. Julian's parents stared at the floor, unable to meet my gaze. No one tried to deny it. No one defended them. The truth was too heavy to twist. I told them I was leaving, that I would not stay another minute in a house built on lies. that the marriage was over before it ever truly began. No one stopped me. As I turned to leave, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Deep, quiet relief. As if a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying had finally been lifted. I walked out into the morning air, my dress brushing against the ground, my heart bruised but still beating. That was the moment I realized something important. I had survived the worst night of my life, and I was still standing. I didn't go back to the estate again. I stayed with a friend for a few days, then returned to my own place. I avoided calls, I ignored messages. I let myself exist in silence, allowing the shock to settle into something manageable. Eventually, the messages turned into apologies, long, rambling explanations from Julian filled with excuses and self-pity. I didn't read most of them. When I did, I felt nothing but distance. Laura tried to reach me too. She sent voice notes, long paragraphs, late-night apologies filled with tears and justifications. I listened to one, only one, and then deleted the rest. Some betrayals don't deserve explanations. I filed for an annulment without hesitation. The paperwork felt cold and impersonal, but signing it brought an unexpected sense of peace. I wasn't ending a marriage, I was reclaiming my life. The days that followed were quiet, painful, but quiet. I started taking long walks alone. I slept more. I cried when I needed to. I stopped blaming myself for what had happened. Slowly, something shifted inside me. I realized that I had spent years shaping myself to fit into someone else's idea of love. I had ignored small doubts, brushed aside red flags, silenced my instincts because I wanted so badly for the dream to be real. Now, for the first time, I was listening to myself. I began rebuilding my life, piece by piece. I returned to work. I focused on things that made me feel capable, grounded, strong. I surrounded myself with people who didn't question my worth. Weeks turned into months. The pain dulled, the memories softened, and in the quiet spaces where grief once lived, something new began to grow: clarity. I stopped replaying that night in my mind. I stopped asking what I could have done differently. I stopped measuring my worth by someone else's betrayal. I was no longer the woman who had been abandoned on her wedding night. I was becoming someone stronger, and I didn't know it yet. This was only the beginning of a completely new chapter, one that would teach me what real love looks like, not in promises, but in peace. The weeks that followed didn't come with dramatic breakthroughs or sudden happiness. Healing didn't arrive like a sunrise. It came slowly, quietly, in small moments that barely announced themselves. I moved into a small apartment on the other side of the city. It wasn't grand or beautiful, but it was mine. The walls were bare, the rooms echoed when I walked through them, and yet there was peace there. No memories attached, no ghosts, just space to breathe. At first, the silence felt unbearable. Nights were the hardest. I would sit on the edge of my bed, staring at the walls, replaying moments I wished I could forget. Sometimes I cried. Other times I felt nothing at all. But even in the numbness, something inside me was slowly stitching itself back together. I started waking up early. I went for long walks before work, letting the cool morning air clear my head. I noticed things I'd never paid attention to before. The way the city woke up, the quiet determination of strangers starting their day, the comfort of routine. These small rituals became my anchor. I threw myself into my work with a focus I'd never had before. It wasn't an escape, it was grounding. I found confidence in solving problems, in creating something meaningful. For the first time in a long while, I felt capable again. People noticed the change. They said I looked calmer, stronger, lighter. I didn't argue. I felt it too. Occasionally, memories would surface unexpectedly. A song, a place, a scent. They still hurt, but the pain no longer controlled me. It came, stayed for a moment, and passed, like a wave that no longer knocked me down. I stopped checking my phone for messages that would never come. I stopped wondering what he was doing or who he was with. That chapter was closed, and I had finally accepted it. One afternoon, weeks after the chaos had settled, I found myself sitting in a quiet cafe near my office. I was reviewing notes for a project when a man at the next table asked if the seat across from me was taken. I looked up, surprised, and shook my head. He thanked me and sat down, offering a polite smile before returning to his work. There was nothing dramatic about him, no charm, no show, just calm energy. We didn't speak again for a while. Then he asked if I minded sharing the outlet for his laptop charger. I smiled and said no. That was it, a simple exchange, nothing more. But something about his presence felt easy, safe. Over the next few weeks, we kept running into each other, always unintentionally. Sometimes we talked, sometimes we didn't. When we did, our conversations were unforced, genuine. He listened more than he spoke. He didn't try to impress me or rush anything. His name was Daniel. He never asked about my past. He never pushed. He simply showed up as himself, consistent, respectful, calm. And slowly, without realizing it, I started to look forward to seeing him. One afternoon, he invited me to join him for a walk after work. We walked through a nearby park, talking about books, travel, small childhood memories. I noticed how peaceful I felt around him. There was no anxiety, no performance, just comfort. Over time, we began spending more moments together. Coffee turned into lunches, lunches into long evening walks. Still, nothing was rushed. There were no promises, no labels, just presence. One evening, as we sat on a bench watching the city lights come on, he looked at me and said, "You don't have to tell me your story if you're not ready. I just want you to know that I'm here, however you need." Something inside me shifted. No one had ever given me that kind of space before. No pressure, no expectations, just respect. That night, I went home and cried, not from pain, but from relief. Slowly, I began to trust again, not blindly, carefully, with boundaries, with awareness. I started to see that love didn't have to be dramatic or painful to be real. It could be quiet, safe, steady. Months passed, and what we had grew naturally. There was no defining moment, no grand confession, just two people choosing each other day after day. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of losing myself in someone else. I was finding myself. And just when I thought my heart had healed as much as it ever would, life tested me one more time, in a way I never expected. Life had settled into a rhythm that finally felt like mine. Mornings began with calm instead of dread. Evenings ended with peace instead of questions. I had rebuilt myself quietly, brick by brick, without rushing, without proving anything to anyone. Daniel and I never rushed into labels. We didn't need to. What we shared grew naturally. Conversations that stretched into hours, comfortable silences, laughter that came easily. He never tried to fix me or fill a space I hadn't asked him to fill. He simply existed beside me, steady and sincere. And for the first time in a long time, I felt safe. That's when the past decided to knock. It was an ordinary afternoon. I was at my desk reviewing documents when the receptionist called to say someone was asking for me downstairs. She sounded unsure, almost hesitant. "He says it's important and personal." Something in her tone made my stomach tighten. When I stepped into the lobby, my breath caught. Julian stood there. He looked thinner, older. The confidence he once carried like armor was gone. His shoulders slumped, his eyes tired and hollow. He looked like a man who had lost more than he knew how to process. For a moment, we simply stared at each other. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel fear. I felt nothing. And that somehow unsettled him more than if I had screamed. "I didn't know if you'd agree to see me," he said quietly. "I didn't," I replied honestly. "Why are you here?" He swallowed. I needed to talk to you." I looked at my watch. 5 minutes. We sat in the small waiting area. The air felt thick, heavy with words neither of us knew how to say. He started talking about regrets, about mistakes, about how everything had fallen apart after I left. He spoke about loneliness, about realizing too late what he had lost. His voice cracked more than once. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, he looked at me the way he used to, as if hoping to find something familiar in my eyes. But he didn't. "I made the biggest mistake of my life," he said quietly. "Yes, you did." I nodded slowly. He looked startled by how calmly I said it. "I've changed," he added quickly. "I know I hurt you. I know I ruined everything, but I think about you all the time. I raised my hand gently, stopping him. "Julian," I said softly, "you don't miss me. You miss who you were when you were with me." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. "I've moved on," I continued, "not because I forgot what happened, but because I healed from it, and I won't go backwards." There was a long silence. His shoulders slumped, as if the weight of reality finally settled on him. "I just wanted a chance to explain," he whispered. "I don't need explanations. I needed honesty back then. Now I just need peace." For the first time, he nodded without arguing. He stood, hesitated, then spoke one last time. "I hope you're happy." I met his eyes steadily. "I am." And I meant it. He left without another word. I watched him walk away, feeling no triumph, no sadness, only closure. When I returned to my office, Daniel was waiting for me. He looked up, concern in his eyes. "You okay?" he asked gently. I smiled. "Yeah, I really am." He didn't press for details. He didn't need them. He simply reached for my hand, grounding me in the present. That evening, as we walked home together, I realized something profound. The past no longer had power over me. It had shaped me, yes, but it no longer defined me. I had loved deeply and lost painfully. I had been betrayed, broken, and forced to rebuild myself from the ground up. And through it all, I had learned the most important truth of all. Love should never make you feel small. That night, as I sat beside Daniel in the quiet of my home, I felt something settle inside me. Not excitement, not fear, but peace. And I knew with absolute certainty that I was exactly where I was meant to be. Time has a quiet way of healing things you once believed would never heal. Not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily, like water smoothing the rough edges of stone. Months passed and life settled into something gentle and real. I stopped measuring my days by what I had lost and started noticing what I had gained. Mornings felt lighter. My chest didn't tighten when I woke up anymore. I smiled more easily. I laughed without forcing it. Daniel and I never rushed into labeling what we were. There was no pressure, no urgency to define us. We simply existed in the same rhythm, cooking together, sharing stories, walking side by side without needing to fill every silence. One evening, as we sat on the balcony watching the city lights flicker on, he turned to me and said something quietly but powerful. "You know, I don't need promises. I just want honesty." I looked at him and realized something profound. Love didn't need to be dramatic to be real. It didn't have to hurt to matter. It could be steady, calm, and deeply safe. That was when I truly understood how much I had grown. I had once mistaken chaos for passion, confusion for intensity, and pain for proof of love. But now I could see clearly. Love was not supposed to consume you. It was meant to support you. And for the first time in my life, I felt supported. Months later, life surprised me in a quiet, beautiful way. One afternoon, while sorting through old documents, I came across a photo from my wedding day. For a moment, I froze. The woman in the picture looked familiar, but distant, like someone I used to know but no longer was. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel grief. I felt compassion for her hope, for her innocence, for the way she believed love meant enduring pain. I placed the photo back in the box, not with bitterness, but with gratitude. That version of me had survived something that could have destroyed her, and because of her, I was here now, stronger, wiser, free. That night, Daniel and I sat on the couch, sharing quiet laughter over a simple dinner. He reached for my hand, not possessively, but gently, like a question, not a claim. I squeezed his hand back. In that moment, I realized I didn't need grand declarations or fairy tales. I didn't need to be rescued. I had already saved myself. What I had now was better than a dream. It was real. Time continued to move forward, bringing new beginnings I never rushed toward, but welcomed when they arrived. My work flourished. I felt grounded, capable, confident in my own skin. And one evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in warm golds and purples, Daniel turned to me and said something simple but powerful. "You know, I don't need you to be perfect. I just want to build a life with you." There was no dramatic pause, no fear, no doubt. I smiled and said yes, not because I was afraid of being alone, but because I finally knew who I was. This time, love wasn't a leap into the unknown. It was a choice made with open eyes and a steady heart. Looking back now, I understand something I wish I'd known sooner. Pain can break you, but it can also reveal you. Loss can empty you, but it can make room for something truer. And sometimes the love that feels like the end of the world is actually the beginning of your real life. I no longer measure my worth by someone else's loyalty or affection. I measure it by the peace I carry, the boundaries I honor, and the life I've built with intention. And if there's one thing I know for sure, it's this: you don't need to be chosen to be worthy. You don't need heartbreak to find strength, and you don't need to lose yourself to be loved. Because the greatest love story you will ever live is the one where you finally choose yourself.